Hello and good evening. Welcome to this evening's Beyond Access series, Turning 5 Highlights. Before we get started, I'd like to officially introduce myself. My name is Andre Mitchell. I'm Director of Family Empowerment and Communications for the Division of Specialized Instruction and Student Support, and welcome to this evening's session. Before we get underway, I'd like to just do some housekeeping. This may or may not be your first time using the GoToWebinar system for our session this evening. So just to let you know, you should see a dashboard. On your dashboard, you should see the opportunity to raise your hand. I'd like to see if one or two people can just raise their hand just to confirm that our audio is working and you can hear us clearly before we get underway. So if one or two folks can, thank you. I see hands going up. Beautiful. Appreciate that. You can lower those hands. Now that we can confirm that you can hear us, want to confirm that you can see the presentation. You should see welcome. This presentation will begin shortly on the screen. Make sure our visuals are working correctly. If one or two people can just raise their hand to confirm that as well. All right, beautiful. Thank you so much. You can lower those hands. This is a webinar style event, so you will not have the opportunity to turn on your cameras, but we do encourage you to engage with us this evening. But in order for everyone to fully participate, I'd like to have our Spanish and Mandarin interpreters start by giving folks telephone lines for our conference. So can our Spanish interpreter come on and just give folks the information on how they can listen in through our Spanish conference line?
Yes. So, good evening, everyone. Buenas noches a todos. Para entrar a la línea de español, por favor, marcar el número 720-527-5818. Una vez más, el número telefónico para la línea de español es 720-527-5818. Y una vez que entre, marque el código de acceso 16-05474. Numeral, una vez más, código de acceso 16-05474, numeral. Muchísimas gracias. Una vez que entre, silencione su celular. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we're placing in the chat the Mandarin information line. They are on, their mic is just not working on this end, but you will be able to hear them and they'll be able to provide you instructions. We're dropping that information directly in the chat. All right, before we get underway, just to let folks know that this event is being recorded. So we thank you for all those who are attending. This event is being recorded and you will automatically get a copy of this evening's recording with your thank you email, which will arrive 24 hours after this event. We are limited on time this evening, so we do ask that you participate and engage with us, but place your questions in the question section of your dashboard. So you should see a question section. That question section will be monitored by our central office staff. We do ask that your questions be limited to the content this evening that we're covering, but we will provide you at the end of the session where you can direct any additional questions or concerns that you have. The question section, the chat section of your dashboard is open for everyone to see, but we ask you to refrain from using the chat section and direct all your questions or concerns in the question section for our central office staff to support you with this evening. Right? Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our Chief of Staff for the Division of Specialized Instruction and Student Support. All right, Rachel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andre. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this session. Thank you for having me. As Andre said, my name is Rachel Rippey. I'm the Chief of Staff for the Special Education Office, and I just wanted to extend a warm welcome to everyone that's here tonight, and thank you for joining us. I want you to know that we are here to answer any questions that folks may have and to follow up even if it's after this evening. So we'll be collecting feedback and making sure we are able to engage with you all as soon as possible and give you as much information as we can. I think that's pretty much it. If you have any other questions for the T5 team, there will be an opportunity to ask those as well. And I am honored and thrilled to introduce my colleague, Jerry Piper.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and good evening, everyone. Just a reminder, Again, that you could submit your questions via the questions window in the GoToWebinar control panel on your screen. We'll answer as many of your questions as possible during and after the presentation. Welcome everyone to this presentation on the transition to kindergarten. Here are some quick reminders for tonight's online presentation. You can listen to this presentation either by telephone or on your computer. Choose your listening method in the GoToWebinar control panel on your screen. Everyone except the presenter will be on mute during the presentation, but we encourage you to submit questions via that questions window. We'll finish up the formal presentation in about 45 minutes and then use the remaining time to answer any questions you may have. The webinar is being recorded, and everyone that is registered for today's session will receive an email with both a link to the webinar recording so that you can review the webinar at any time, and another link to a PDF version of today's presentation. My name is Jerry, and I work in the special education office as part of the Turning 5 team. We work to provide information and assistance to families as they participate in the Turning 5 process. That's what we're going to be talking about during tonight's presentation. You'll find a PDF version of our kindergarten guide in the handouts window in your control panel. Almost everything that I'll be talking about tonight can be found in this guide. We'll start by talking very briefly about our vision for special education in New York City public schools. After that, we'll talk about the two processes that families of preschool students with disabilities will participate in as they prepare for kindergarten. We'll begin with kindergarten, with the first process, the process that almost all families of preschoolers will participate in, applying to kindergarten through the kindergarten admissions process, which is managed by the Office of Student Enrollment. We'll then talk about the second process, what we call the Turning 5 process. This is the process for families of preschoolers with disabilities who are preparing for kindergarten and considering special education. It includes the development of the kindergarten IEP, the Individualized Education Program. We'll talk all about the kindergarten IEP, what it is, why it's so important, and how you'll help create it. When we talk about our vision for special education in New York City public schools, there are three principles that help to guide us in our planning. The first, students with individualized education programs, or IEPs, should have the same access to schools as they would if they did not have IEPs. This means, as much as possible, we'd like to have your child attend the school that they would have attended if they weren't going to receive special education supports in the first place. Typically, this means the school where you've received an offer through the kindergarten admissions process. This may not always be appropriate. There may be a specialized program or a specialized school that would best serve your child. But if it's possible, we want your child to be able to attend the school that they would have attended if they didn't have an IEP. Secondly, students with IEPs are taught in the least restrictive environment that is appropriate, alongside students without disabilities, to the maximum extent possible. You'll hear us talk about finding your child's least restrictive environment, or LRE, quite a lot. The least restrictive environment for your child is where and how your child can be educated alongside children who don't have disabilities as much as possible, wherever it's appropriate, for all of the school day or for part of the school day. Why? Well, we know that children learn not just from their teachers and other adults. We know that children also learn from their peers, their friends, the other children in the class. If your child can learn alongside children who don't have disabilities, then your child will have a greater exposure to other children's language and will see other children's work habits and behavior as models. They're going to be in environments where there's rich language and conversation about the curriculum throughout the school day. So wherever appropriate, maybe for part of the school day, maybe for most of the school day, if we can provide the supports and services that allow your child to learn in a classroom with their non-disabled peers, we're going to try to make that happen. It's a principle we believe in, and it's also the law. When we plan for special education services, we begin by considering the least restrictive environment, LRE. And thirdly, students with IEPs should have access to a rigorous academic curriculum and be held to high academic standards, enabling them to realize their potential. Regardless of what kinds of programs and services your child receives, we want your child to have access to a challenging, rigorous curriculum. We want your child to start kindergarten with as much access as possible to that kind of challenge and that kind of rich content and learning that kindergarten can offer. And although we're talking about kindergarten this evening, our larger concern is considering your child's educational path, starting with kindergarten. How can we continue to support your child as they access that challenging curriculum for all the years of their schooling? Let's begin by talking about the two processes you'll be going through as you prepare for kindergarten. Every child who will reach the age of 5 in this calendar year is invited to participate in the kindergarten admissions process, and everyone who participates will receive a kindergarten offer to start kindergarten in September of this calendar year. The Office of Student Enrollment will review this process with you in just a moment. In addition, as the family of a child that either has a preschool individualized education program or may have one during this preschool year, you will also be going through a second process, the Turning 5 process, to consider developing a kindergarten IEP for your child. If you and your kindergarten IEP team determine that your child is eligible for special education in kindergarten, then you and your IEP team will work together to develop the kindergarten IEP. At the very end of this second process, your child will receive a kindergarten placement in a school that will provide the special education supports and services that are indicated in your child's IEP. In the vast majority of cases, the kindergarten offer from the kindergarten admissions process and the kindergarten placement from the kindergarten IEP process will be for the same school. We'll talk about how these two processes connect and what to expect as you go through each one of them. At the end of these processes, you will know the school where your child will be going to kindergarten and what special education supports and services, if any, your child will be receiving in that school. On this slide, you can see some additional detail about the steps in each one of these two processes. We'll begin by talking about the first process, applying to kindergarten. Applying to kindergarten happens through the kindergarten admissions process. In the year that children turn 5, they can participate in the kindergarten admissions process. Children are eligible to attend kindergarten in the fall of the year they turn 5 years old. They should participate in kindergarten admissions the winter before. Kindergarten is an exciting step in your child's elementary school journey. Elementary education prepares your child for success in life. There are two types of elementary schools in New York City. The first type of school is a zone school. Most schools have an area around them called their zone. If you live within this zone, that school is your zone school. Zone schools prioritize admissions for children living within their zone. Most children attend their zone schools for kindergarten. There are also non-zone schools throughout the city. These schools do not have a zone. Rather, they give priority to siblings, current pre-K students, and other students throughout the district. Sometimes other criteria are also considered. If you are interested in a non-zone school, I encourage you to learn more about how that individual school makes offers. This year, you will be able to use the same kindergarten application to apply to gifted and talented programs. If you list a gifted and talented program on your application, your child's eligibility will be determined either by their current pre-K teacher if they attend a public DOE pre-K program, or an interview if they are not enrolled or go to private or parochial school. You can visit our webpage, schools.nyc.gov/GT, for more information. To begin to narrow down your choices, you should first find out what district you live in. New York City is divided up into 32 geographic school districts. Once you know your district, next you can find your zone school. A zone school has specific addresses in the area assigned to it, and it is the school where your child is most likely to attend kindergarten. To find your district and zone school, you can call 311 or visit our website, myschools.nyc. All families with children turning 5 this year should participate in the kindergarten admissions process. Many families have already begun the admissions process by applying by the deadline. All applications submitted by the deadline are treated the same. The application process is not first come, first served. If you submitted by the deadline, you will receive an offer letter in the spring. Families must accept their offer by the deadline and register with the school with the necessary documents. If you don't accept your offer by the deadline, you may lose your offer. Registering at your offered school does not affect your chances of getting a waitlist offer or a charter school offer. Registering saves your spot at the offered school. You'll automatically be placed on the waiting list for any program you list higher than the offer you receive in the spring. Throughout the late spring and summer, schools manage their own wait lists and will contact you directly if they are able to make you a waitlist offer. If you miss the initial deadline, you could still participate in the kindergarten admissions process. Here are your next steps. If you haven't already, you should explore your options. You should learn what school is your zone school. We encourage families to visit myschools.nyc to learn more about school options. You can add yourself to wait lists, to the wait list of your zone school and any school of interest. You can do so online at myschools.nyc. All children turning 5 years old, even current pre-K students, should apply to be considered for a kindergarten seat. Submitting an application is the best way to indicate your school preference and your best chance at getting an offer to a school of interest. As you research school options, we encourage you to use myschools.nyc, our online directory and application tool, which contains more details about each school, including programs, address, and admissions priorities. If you want to apply to a dual language program, be sure to list that program as a choice on your application. The myschools.nyc online directory also lists which groups of students got offers the year before. This will give you a good sense of which groups may get offers this year. All families, including those of students with disabilities, should apply to kindergarten. If your child has an IEP, you should still submit a kindergarten application. Unlike the CPSE process, school assignments are not made based on what the IEP recommends. There are a few exceptions, which will be discussed later in this presentation. Every on-time applicant will receive an offer in the spring. Offers are made based on admissions priorities. Admissions priorities group students based on their priority to attend an individual school. For example, at zone schools, all zone students would receive an offer before a non-zone family is considered for a seat at the school. The process does not take IEP status into account when we make offers. Your child has the same chance of getting into a school as a child without an IEP. If your child has a school-aged IEP, you will receive an additional letter later in the spring. In almost all cases, it will list the same school as your kindergarten admissions offer if you applied. If the student is recommended for a District 75 school or a non-public school, then they will receive that school placement through the Turning 5 process. All schools should serve their students and are expected to provide students special education services and programs. If your child needs an accessible school, he or she will receive an offer to one. The DOE will ensure that your child is offered a school that meets their accessibility need. If your child has an accessibility need, we encourage you to list accessible schools on the application. The application and directory will list which schools are fully accessible, partially accessible, or not accessible. You can also search for accessible schools using myschools.nyc. We encourage families of students with accessibility needs to reach out to schools listed as fully or partially accessible to understand what accommodations are in place and how they would serve the child. Additionally, the kindergarten application has a question where you can indicate your child's accessibility need. Every 5-year-old will have a place to go to school in September. If you choose not to apply to kindergarten and your child receives a school-aged IEP, then your child will be assigned a placement in your district of residence. If you believe that your child will be recommended for a specialized program or a District 75 school next year, you can still apply. If a student ends up receiving an IEP recommendation for a specialized school, they can reject the offer they received through the kindergarten admissions process. The kindergarten application is your opportunity to let us know what schools you're interested in. Even if you just apply to your zone school, you are at least giving your child an equal chance at a seat there. If busing is listed on the student's IEP, then yes, your child will receive busing. Otherwise, transportation will be discussed later in the presentation. If you still have questions, there are 3 ways to reach out to the Office of Student Enrollment. You can email esenrollment@schools.nyc.gov, call 718-935-2009, or visit a Family Welcome Center. You can find information about our Family Welcome Centers by visiting schools.nyc.gov/FWC for Family Welcome Center. Also, some additional resources. You can find your zone school online at schools.nyc.gov/findaschool. You can learn more about kindergarten at schools.nyc.gov/kindergarten. And you can also subscribe to receive updates at schools.nyc.gov/signup. We've just described the kindergarten admissions process, the first of the two processes that you'll participate in as you prepare for kindergarten. Now let's talk in detail about the second process, the Turning 5 process, including the development of the kindergarten IEP. Let's talk about what you can expect as we reevaluate your child in preparation for kindergarten to decide if your child is eligible for special education services in kindergarten, and if so, develop the kindergarten IEP, the program of special education services that the Department of Education will provide to your child. This Turning 5 process will apply to both families that already have a preschool IEP and families that don't yet have a preschool IEP, but may receive one during this preschool year. Sometime during this past year, you will have had or will have a preschool IEP meeting, either to develop the program of special education services that your child will receive in preschool for the first time, or to have an annual review if your child has already been receiving services to look ahead to the coming year for preschool services. You may have had that meeting already, or you may have it later. In either case, that preschool IEP meeting is different and separate from the kindergarten IEP meeting, which is also sometimes called the school age meeting. How are these meetings different? Well, first, how we decide whether a child is eligible for special education services is different for preschool and for school age. And second, the kinds of programs and services that are provided for kindergartners are a little different from those provided for preschool students. The two most important questions to be answered at the kindergarten IEP meeting are, is my child eligible for kindergarten special education services? And if so, what will that look like? What will be the recommended school setting for my child, called the placement recommendation? And what will those services be? If the IEP team decides that your child is eligible for a kindergarten IEP, then services will begin in September when your child starts kindergarten. What about my child's current preschool special education services? Those preschool services will continue throughout your child's preschool year. You may have already had your annual review, or you may have your annual review later this year with your CPSE administrator. You will continue to work with your CPSE administrator for preschool services. At the same time, you will start the kindergarten IEP process for school age services that will begin in September of your child's kindergarten year. Let's talk in detail about the Turning 5 process. We'll begin with a brief overview of the Turning 5 steps and their approximate timelines. Then we'll talk in detail about these steps later in the presentation. Please note that these steps will appear in the same order regardless of when the process starts for your family. First is connecting with your IEP team. This is typically the starting point for the Turning 5 process. Most of you will be hearing from your IEP team in January, but teams will continue to contact families from January through July. The timing of steps that follow depends on when a family is first contacted by their IEP team. Next comes new assessments, if any, then submitting medical forms, if any, then the kindergarten IEP meeting, and then finally, school location letters or green letters that will be sent to families from late May until the end of August. So let's begin with the first step, connecting with your IEP team. You will be contacted by your child's DOE kindergarten IEP team to start the IEP process. The kindergarten IEP team is similar to, but not the same as, the IEP team that helped create your child's preschool IEP. If your child is already receiving preschool special education services by the start of their last year in preschool, you'll typically receive a yellow welcome packet by mail in the fall and will be contacted by your DOE IEP team in the winter, meaning January through March. On the other hand, if your child starts the preschool special education evaluation process during their last year of preschool and does not have a preschool IEP by March of their last preschool year, then you'll be contacted after that process is complete, usually in the spring or summer before kindergarten, that is, April through August. When you hear from your DOE kindergarten IEP team, they will introduce themselves and explain the IEP process to you. The DOE is required to provide documents in writing to families during the IEP process. Throughout the process, you will receive several different documents called Prior Written Notices, or PWNs. To start, your IEP team will share a PWN entitled Notice of Referral. This document explains that the DOE is proposing to conduct a reevaluation. A reevaluation will determine if your child continues to be eligible for special education services, and if so, determine what services would meet their needs next year in kindergarten. This PWN will also include contact information for your DOE kindergarten IEP team. It will share a staff member's name and phone number. Finally, the PWN may come with a request for you to consent to conduct assessments of your child. Usually, this DOE representative will be a school psychologist, usually one who works in an elementary school. It might be a school psychologist who works at a district committee on special education office or a district CSE office. If you've gone to your preschool IEP meeting and you've worked with your CPSE administrator or your CPSE team, their offices are usually in the same building as those CSE offices. Your DOE representative, the person that will be in contact with you throughout the Turning 5 process and will lead your kindergarten IEP team, might be right at that CSE office. However, most of the time, your DOE representative will work in an elementary school. It might be your local elementary school. It might be a different school. The next step is the consideration of new assessments. To get ready for kindergarten, your child will need to be reevaluated. This is part of the process of deciding if your child will need special education services in kindergarten. And you might be thinking, reevaluated? My child just went through all kinds of evaluations to make decisions about preschool services. Do we have to do this all over again for kindergarten? Well, when we say reevaluated, we don't necessarily mean new tests or more tests, particularly if your child recently had evaluations for preschool, such as a psychological evaluation, an educational evaluation, or a speech language evaluation. If those preschool evaluations happened recently, the kindergarten IEP team can use the results of those evaluations for the reevaluation for kindergarten. Once again, the purpose of a reevaluation is to help determine if your child will continue to need special education services in kindergarten, and if so, to help determine the appropriate special education services for your child in a school-age setting. The first thing that the team will do is take a look at what they already have. They'll look at your child's preschool IEP. They'll look at any assessments, any testing results that they already have. If you have testing that you've had done outside of your preschool IEP process that you want to provide to your kindergarten IEP team, please do. They'll take those into account as well. And then the IEP team will recommend if more assessments are necessary. Your IEP team will let you know through a letter in the mail whether new assessments are planned. If so, the team will ask you to sign the letter and return it to consent. If you have any questions about those planned assessments, contact your DOE representative and ask about them so that you understand what to expect. Your DOE representative will also let you know, again through a letter in the mail, if no new assessments are necessary. If you've had testing results that you'd like to share with your DOE representative, please do. You also have the right to request new testing that you think would be appropriate and important to provide information about your child to help make decisions about kindergarten. So let your DOE representative know if you'd like to request specific assessments, and if your DOE representative agrees, then they'll be done as well. The next step is the consideration of your child's medical needs, and if any, and the submission of forms regarding those needs. If your child needs help from a nurse with taking medications while at school, you have to complete what is called a Medication Administration Form, or MAF. The Office of School Health needs to review and approve any MAFs, and again, it is important that you submit these forms as soon as possible to your DOE representative so that the forms can be reviewed before your child's IEP meeting. Starting this year, the forms have been made writable, meaning the PDF forms can be filled in and saved on your computer. Nursing services in kindergarten will be a bit different than they are in preschool. Children attending preschool who need skilled nursing services automatically receive one-to-one nursing service because not every preschool has a nurse on site. Elementary schools do have school nurses. So while a preschooler might be assisted by a one-to-one nurse, it's possible that this same child in kindergarten would receive nursing services from a school nurse instead of a one-to-one nurse. About these MAFs, there are several different MAFs for medication administration, and you'll only be required to submit the MAF or MAFs that are applicable to your child. For example, asthma, allergies or anaphylaxis, seizure, diabetes, a general MAF for any other medication. These forms need to be submitted annually each school year. Nursing services cannot be implemented if current school year MAF forms are not submitted for review. The Medical Accommodations Request Form, also known as the MARF, is a new form to the Medication Administration Form packet. Starting this year, the forms have been made writable, again, making them easy to fill in and save. Please have your doctor complete this form when any accommodation is needed for your child. The form now provides a clearer picture of your child's needs. Requests for nursing or paraprofessional support will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis to determine if the child needs one-to-one support or school-based support. The medication administration forms will still be required for nursing services to be provided in September. There's also an MAF to request medical treatment for your child. The request for provision of medically prescribed treatment non-medication. Like the name of the form indicates, please use this form only to request nursing services involving medical treatment. It should not be submitted to request help with medication. Your child may need both medication and treatment in school, and if so, you'll need to submit multiple MAFs. When completing and submitting MAFs, please keep the following 3 things in mind. First, on each form, be sure to include your child's New York ID number, also known as their OSIS number. This number uniquely identifies your child. Second, please note that if the doctor's information is missing or the form is not filled out completely, this will delay the review process. And third, the parent consent form must be signed and dated before the service can be provided. By signing and dating this form, you, the parent, give permission to the Department of Education to administer medication and/or treatment as prescribed by your doctor. When you sign and date the form, please do so on the same day or after your child's doctor signs the form. If you sign before the doctor, the form is invalid. So now let's turn our attention to transportation. How do kindergartners in New York City get to school? Most students with disabilities in kindergarten walk to school or take public transportation, such as an MTA bus or subway, with their parent or guardian. Some children who live more than a half a mile away and attend school in the same borough may be eligible for stop-to-school bus service, meaning children walk to a school bus stop and take the bus from there. Please note that this is not a guarantee, even if your child does meet these 2 criteria. When creating your kindergarten application, keep this in mind and only list schools that you would be willing to walk to or take public transportation to. There are 2 types of busing at kindergarten: stop-to-school bus service and curb-to-school bus service. Stop to school is for when a child walks to and from a bus stop where a group of children wait and take the bus to the school. There is only one driver and there is no attendant. The driver is the only adult on the bus. Eligibility for stop-to-school bus service is based on the student's grade and distance. Curb-to-school service is also called specialized transportation or door-to-door. Eligibility for this service is based on whether the child has a challenge or condition that requires the child to ride a bus from their home to school and is recommended on their IEP. For curb-to-school bus service, the bus picks up the child from the safest nearest curb to the child's home and takes them to school. This means that the child's pickup may not necessarily be right in front of their building door. There is one driver and one attendant on the bus. Additional accommodations may be recommended based on the child's particular challenges and transportation needs. Some children require accommodations on the school bus in addition to receiving curb-to-school service. These are based on the child's transportation needs as outlined during the IEP meeting and confirmed by the Office of School Health. Accommodations are not based on family preferences. Any family requests for accommodations must be discussed and considered during the IEP meeting. Accommodations may include a one-to-one paraprofessional for either general or behavioral purposes, a nurse, for example, if the child has a medical condition that requires access to a nurse at all times, or a wheelchair lift. Families must request accommodations and provide the appropriate forms at the IEP meeting to be considered for accommodations. These documents will be provided to the family in the social history interview and must be completed by the child's physician. Something that's very important to know, car seats are not available for kindergartners on either stop to school or curb to school service. The only way a child will receive a car seat on the bus is if the child weighs less than 50 pounds or the child has a medical necessity for the car seat or the 5-point harness, meaning the child is medically fragile. Now we're going to go through some frequently asked questions. My child receives busing for preschool. Will they automatically get it next year? No. Only children who have a challenge or condition that requires curb to school transportation will be recommended for that service. You must request transportation from your IEP team to be considered for it. If the IEP team recommends transportation accommodations, the Office of School Health will review and approve or deny the request. As mentioned before, other children may receive stop to school service if they meet the eligibility criteria and a route can be created. How is my child supposed to get to school? Most students with disabilities either walk to school or take public transportation, meaning the bus or subway. Some children will be eligible for stop to school transportation. What if my child goes to a gifted and talented program? Will they receive busing? Not necessarily. No matter where a child goes to school, they are subject to grade and distance eligibility unless transportation is recommended on their IEP. If my child receives a bus, they'll be in a car seat, right? No. Once again, car seats are not available for kindergartners on either stop to school or curb to school service. The only way that will be provided is if the child weighs less than 50 pounds or there is a medical necessity, and it is recommended on their IEP. Can I ride the bus with my child? No. No adults other than the driver and the attendant for curb to school service and nurses or other paraprofessionals for curb to school services as recommended are permitted on the bus. If my child receives busing, where can I obtain route information? This information is available to families on their New York City school account or their NYCSA account. For additional information, you can email early childhood busing at schools.nyc.gov. You can call OPT's customer service unit at 718-392-8855 or visit schools.nyc.gov/transportation. Let's move on to the kindergarten IEP meeting. The kindergarten IEP meeting will take place anytime from mid-February until the end of August. So what's next? After any assessments that were scheduled have been completed, then the kindergarten IEP meeting will be scheduled. At this meeting, you'll be getting together with the IEP team to look at the assessments, to look at your child's records, and to have a conversation about your child and make some decisions about kindergarten. You'll receive a letter in the mail with the date, time, and place of the IEP meeting. If the meeting date or time or place doesn't work for you, please let your DOE representative know right away, and the meeting will be rescheduled. The letter will also list the participants in the IEP meeting, and we'll talk about those participants in just a moment. The kindergarten IEP meeting will take place either at a school or at a district CSE office, wherever the DOE representative is based. It's important to note that just because the IEP meeting happens at a particular school, that doesn't necessarily mean that your child will be attending kindergarten in that school. The kindergarten IEP meeting is about deciding if your child will be receiving special ed in kindergarten, and if so, deciding the appropriate school setting for your child and what those special education services will look like. The meeting is not about the specific school where your child will attend kindergarten. That decision is a separate process that will come later. Once again, the two questions to ask and be answered at your child's IEP meeting: is my child eligible for kindergarten special ed? And if so, what will be the recommended school setting? And what will be those recommended special education services? Who will be at your IEP meeting? You. You are the most important member of the IEP team. Your insight, your input is crucial to this process. The professionals who work with your child or have tested your child or have reviewed your child's file know a certain kind of information about your child. But of course, you know your child in a different and deeper way. And your input about what happens at home, what you see as your child transitions from one activity to another, what you know your child will need to be successful in kindergarten is so important. Does that mean that you make the decision on your own? Of course not. You're there with the other members of the IEP team to work together, to discuss, to review, to collaborate, and to come to agreement about a plan for your child. Who else will be there? A school psychologist, likely the person that you've been in contact with, the leader of your IEP team. A social worker might also be the leader. Special education teachers and service providers. If your child has a special education teacher right now, or is receiving a service such as speech language therapy from a therapist right now, those people should participate in that meeting. A gen ed teacher should be part of this meeting. A district representative, someone from your school from your school district who knows all about the special education programs and services that are available. This person is probably one of the people already invited to the meeting, a school psychologist or social worker. Someone who can help explain the results of any assessments, what the results mean, and why they're important. Once again, this is typically someone already present in the meeting. Anyone that you've invited to the meeting to provide insight about your child and your child's needs. You might want to invite someone who's worked with your child professionally and can provide insight into your child's needs. You might want to invite a family friend who knows your child in a less formal way, but can still provide insight. You might want to bring a friend just to take notes. So while you're just making all these big decisions about kindergarten and special education for your child, your friend can be taking notes for you. You have the right to request someone called the parent member to attend the meeting. The parent member is the parent of a child who receives special education services in the New York City public school system, who's been trained to be a source of information for you and a support to you at this meeting. This is not someone who works for the Department of Ed, but it is someone who's a parent like yourself, who's gone through this process, who can be at your side and be a resource for you. If you can't think of anyone you'd like to invite to the meeting, you can request a parent member and one will attend the meeting with you. It can be difficult to get all of these people together at one time in one place for the meeting, so if it's okay with you, some of the IEP team members may arrange to join the meeting by telephone. If you're most comfortable speaking in a language other than English, let your IEP team know, and an interpreter will be available at the meeting as well. Once again, the two questions: is my child eligible for kindergarten special education? And if so, what will be the services recommended for my child? How the decision to be made about whether or not your child is eligible for kindergarten special education, how that's made is different from how it's decided for preschool services. In preschool, the preschool team was looking at your child's overall development and whether there were areas of disability or delay. If they saw disability or delay, the team recommended that your child receive special education services in preschool. For kindergarten, sometimes called school age, the decision regarding special education services shifts from looking at your child's overall development to looking at your child's development as it relates to making progress in school. For almost all children in preschool, the disability classification listed on your preschool IEP is preschool student with a disability. And that's because preschool students are so young and they're all developing at different speeds and different amounts that we don't list a specific disability that your preschooler might or might not have. Now we'll talk about how you and the IEP team will make that decision to provide kindergarten special education services. If the IEP team decides that your child is not eligible for services in kindergarten, your child will be what we call declassified. That decision will not affect your child's preschool services. Your child's preschool services will continue through June for a 10-month preschool IEP or through mid-August for a 12-month preschool IEP, just as those services are described in your child's preschool IEP. But if your child is declassified at the kindergarten IEP meeting, then your child won't receive special education services in kindergarten. You and the IEP team might decide that your child will need what's called declassification support services during kindergarten. These are not special education services, but they are services provided to students who have been declassified from special education, and they're extra support during kindergarten from the teacher or a speech language therapist or some extra support for reading, for example. If you and the IEP team decide that your child is eligible, your next step will be to develop the kindergarten IEP. What will be the accommodations, the supports, the services that my child will need to make progress in kindergarten? The team will begin by looking at where your child is now, how your child is functioning in school, what test results show, what your child's teachers and service providers contribute, what you contribute about how your child is functioning now. This information will be described in a part of the IEP called the present levels of performance. Then, based on your child's current performance, you'll think about annual goals for your child to achieve, and then list the services that will be provided to help your child reach those goals. For example, if your child has difficulty with fine motor skills, which might impact your child's ability to use math materials in the classroom or to develop handwriting skills, then a goal might be to develop fine motor skills. That goal will describe exactly what your child should be able to do a year from the start of the IEP, so a year from September. The team will then decide which special education supports and services your child will need to reach those goals. These supports and services will be listed in the IEP, the Individualized Education Program for your child. After your kindergarten IEP meeting, you'll receive a prior written notice in the mail. This document summarizes the outcome of your IEP meeting and will contain two types of information: a placement recommendation, that is the type of school setting, and the special education recommendations. We'll talk in some detail about the kinds of school settings that may appear and the types of services that may appear. It's important to remember that this prior written notice of recommendation does not indicate the school where your child will attend kindergarten. It will indicate the recommended type of school setting for your child and the recommended services for your child. This document will be fully translated and will appear in both English and your home language. So what's next? The final step in this process after your kindergarten IEP meeting is the receipt of the green school location letter. This is the letter that will list the name, location, and contact information of the school where your child will receive special education services in kindergarten. And at this point, if your child's IEP includes a District 1 through 32 school recommendation, then the green letter will tell you what you already know. That is where your child will be attending kindergarten in the fall. Why? Well, because most children who receive a kindergarten offer for a school through the kindergarten admissions process will also receive a kindergarten placement at the same school through the kindergarten IEP process. Once again, for most students, the kindergarten offer and the kindergarten placement will be for the same school. There are a few exceptions that we'll touch on a bit later in the presentation, but for most students, families will receive a kindergarten offer for a particular school through the kindergarten admissions process, and those families will receive a kindergarten placement at the same school during the Turning 5 process. If you receive a green letter with a different school listed than the one you received in your kindergarten offer, it's important that you register at the school listed on the green letter if you haven't already done so, as that's the school where your child's special education services will be provided. And here's an example of the two letters, the PWN you'll receive after your IEP meeting, and then the green school location letter, which will include the name of the school where your child will receive special education services. Now that we've covered the steps associated with the Turning 5 process, including the development of the kindergarten IEP, let's provide some detail about the kinds of special education programs and services that are available to kindergartners. This chart is called the Continuum of Special Education Services in New York City. It lists special education services in a particular order, from top to bottom, from less restrictive to more restrictive. Remember that restrictive describes how often a child with disabilities learns alongside other children without disabilities, other children who don't have IEPs. And you'll see that this chart begins with general education, children who receive no special education services, and it works its way through the list from less restrictive to more restrictive. So least restrictive of all is a child who is a Gen Ed student and doesn't receive any special education services, a child without an IEP. Next on the list is general education with related services, and we'll talk about related services in just a moment. As we continue through the list, we see services that are provided in general education settings, where students with disabilities receive services that allow them to learn alongside their non-disabled peers, either for part of the school day or for more or most of the day. These are special education teacher support services, or SETS, and integrated co-teaching, or ICT. As we continue through the list, we come to special class services. These are smaller classes with different sizes and ratios of students to teachers. But in special classes, there are only students with IEPs, so these services are more restrictive and can be provided for part of the day or for more or most of the school day. Then continuing through the list, programs and services that are more restrictive for students who have more intensive needs and need more specialized instruction or support. These services are day and residential placement and home and hospital instruction. As you discuss with your IEP team, you'll begin at the top of the list, starting with the less restrictive services, and work your way through the list, considering which services would be appropriate for your child based on your child's needs. Let's discuss these services in more detail, beginning with related services. Related services are services generally provided by therapists, such as speech-language therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy. There's a list here and a description in your K-Guide. Your kindergarten orientation guide. The goal of related services and of all school-age special education services is to help students with disabilities achieve their educational goals. In other words, to support your students' classroom learning. For example, your child might receive speech therapy in the classroom or outside of the classroom. In either case, the therapist will work with your child on skills that directly relate to what's happening in the classroom. A related service provider, such as an occupational therapist, might collaborate with your child's teacher to plan what happens in the classroom, might work alongside your child individually right in the classroom, or might work with a small group of students either inside the classroom or in another location in the school. SETS, Special Education Teacher Support Services. These services are usually provided to small groups of students by a special ed teacher. The teacher works with students on academic skills related to what's going on in the classroom. The SETS teacher might work in the classroom, come to the classroom and work with a group of students alongside the classroom teacher, pick up children for one period a day, perhaps once or twice a week, and take the group to a separate location to work on academic skills, or provide a combination of both in-class and out-of-class services. Integrated co-teaching, or ICT. A typical ICT class consists of 25 students in total. Of that 25, no more than 40% or up to 12 students will have IEPs, and the remaining students in the class will not have IEPs. There are two full-time teachers working together, a gen ed teacher and a special ed teacher. The gen ed teacher works with all the students. The special ed teacher works with the students with IEPs to help them reach their IEP goals. The two teachers work together. They co-teach, meaning they plan together, they teach together, and work as a team. Excuse me. So what does ICT look like? The teachers may be teaching side by side. The general education teacher might be teaching a lesson to the class, and the special education teacher might be side by side supporting the IEP students and keeping their attention focused, for example.
Jerry, I just want to give you a quick update on time.
Okay.
So I'm not sure. I think a lot of these are in the kindergarten orientation guide, like you mentioned.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if you just want to skip ahead a little bit so that we can make sure that we get through it.
Sure.
Sorry about
Thank
that.
you, Andrew.
Sure.
So ICT, general education teacher and special ed teacher. The special ed teacher will provide the kind of accommodation, modification of the curriculum, and specialized teaching that will help those students achieve their IEP goals, and that's provided right there in that classroom. Like SETS and ICT, special class services are provided in all District 1 through 32 non-specialized schools, meaning all neighborhood elementary schools. All the students in a special ed class have IEPs, and there are different ratios, 12:1 and 12:1:1. Because all of the students have IEPs, the instruction will be tailored to their IEP goals. So you might see, more likely than in a general education classroom, a specialized reading program in use. Let's talk for a moment about placement recommendation. That is, the IEP team's recommendation for the type of school setting that is appropriate for your child. There are two public school placement recommendations. District 1 through 32 are non-specialized schools. These are neighborhood schools that serve both children with and without special education needs. And District 75 schools are specialized schools that serve only students with special education needs. Other placement recommendations include this New York State Education Department approved non-public schools or New York State Education Department supported schools. If your child's IEP recommends a District 1 through 32 school placement, your child's special education services will most likely be provided at the same school where you received a kindergarten offer. That is, where your child was accepted through the kindergarten admissions process. One of the reasons why your child's special education kindergarten placement, that is the school listed on your green school location letter, might be different than your kindergarten offer is that you've applied to and been accepted into a specialized program. We'll talk about specialized programs in just a minute. The programs and services we talked about so far are provided in any and all District 1 through 32 or non-specialized schools. Now we'll talk about some specialized programs, and we'll do this quickly, that are available in some, but not all, District 1 through 32 schools. For students that are diagnosed with a disability classification of ASD or autism spectrum disorder, there's ASD Nest and ASD Horizon. There's a specialized program for students with intellectual disabilities called ACEs. There's a specialized program for students who need special education instruction in a language other than English, and that's called bilingual special education, or BSE. And there's two additional programs called AIMS and iRead. And we'll have detail about those. For most of these programs, there is a application process, and the programs may or may not be the right fit for your child's individual needs. So we recommend that you apply to kindergarten through the kindergarten admissions process, regardless of your interest in the programs. What I'm going to do in the interest of time here is go ahead and move through these quickly, and there will be links and information at the end of the presentation where you can get additional information about each one of these specialized programs. ASD Nest and Horizon, again, are both programs for students diagnosed with a disability of autism spectrum disorder. ACEs, Academics, Career, and Essential Skills for students with intellectual disabilities, and this is both curriculum and functional skills based. Bilingual special education, again, for students who need special education instruction in a language other than English. There's no application for this process, but it will be recommended during your IEP meeting, and your child would receive a placement in a school that offers bilingual special education in your child's language. iRead consists of two teachers like ICT and a combination of both students with and without IEPs, and provides reading interventions to students with disabilities. I've spoken previously about districts 1 through 32, which are geographic areas. You might live in District 1 or District 5. District 75 is not a geographic district. It's not a place. It's an organizational structure that runs special education programs throughout the city, and it serves children with significant challenges, students with ASD, cognitive delays, emotional disabilities, sensory impairments, and multiple disabilities. In general, students who have very significant needs. If your IEP team decides that a District 1 through 32 school would not be able to meet your child's needs, then they'll consider recommending a District 75 program. You can find out more about the different kinds of District 75 classes and programs in your kindergarten orientation guide. We'll talk briefly about AIMS. AIMS stands for Acquisition Integrated Services, Meaningful Communication, Social Skills. Like a special class, the AIMS classroom consists of six students, a special education teacher, and a teaching assistant or a paraprofessional. Students in the AIMS program will have a disability classification of autism and exhibit deficits in a variety of forms of communication. Like other special programs, there's a separate application process. You can email aimsprogram@schools.nyc.gov for more information. And state-approved non-public schools are for children, only children with disabilities, children who have intensive educational needs, and state-supported schools serve children who are deaf or blind or have severe disabilities. If your IEP team determines that there's no public school setting where your child's needs can be met, then they will consider recommending one of these non-public schools. What if you plan on sending your child to private or religious school? You can request an IESP, that's an Individualized Education Services Plan, to take with you to your private or public school. If you're going to private school and paying for it yourself, but you want equitable special education services, you want the same kinds of special education services that your child would have received in public school, such as speech language therapy, for example, to be provided when your child goes to private school. You can always get your IEP, get a placement for a New York City public school, and then tell the DOE, I'm not attending the public school, I'm attending private school. You can go back to your IEP team and you can request an IESP to take with you to the private school. Charter schools are public schools, but they're not run by the New York City Department of Education. They're run by private or nonprofit groups. The charter school admissions process are typically lotteries and differ from the kindergarten admissions process in the New York City Department of Education. You'll want to check with each charter school's particular process, going to their websites to make sure that you understand how to apply to kindergarten. If your child has an IEP, your child's services will be provided at the charter school with the help of the Department of Education. You can get more information about charters by visiting the website that's shown at the bottom. You can revoke consent for special education services so that when your child begins kindergarten, he or she will not start with any special education services. You just need to put that in writing and get that to your IEP team, and they will make sure that your child begins kindergarten without any special education services. I'm going to skip over the review of the mailing here, the most important being the green letter that you'll get through the Turning 5 process, through the kindergarten IEP process, which will list the school where your child will receive services. Please make sure we have your correct address. Talk with your CPSC administrator, with your CPSC team, your preschool team, to make sure that we have the correct address in the system. There is a special Turning 5 email address called turning5@schools.nyc.gov. This is specifically for families that are already in the Turning 5 process. Your first point of contact should be your IEP team. You'll ask any questions and they'll help you resolve any issues. Contact your DOE representative, the leader of your IEP team. This chart, which you'll receive again in an email after this presentation, lists a bunch of the things that we've talked about this evening that are supports with their websites and email addresses, as well as some additional outside organizations that can provide support. That's it. That's everything. We've covered everything this evening. I want to show you, or I want to make sure that you fill out the survey that will pop up at the end of the presentation. This is the end of the formal presentation, so I thank you for your patience as we went through a lot of material. And we'll continue to attempt to answer, if not tonight, eventually get answers to the questions that you're entering into the questions window. I just want to leave you with two more slides. At the end of this presentation, there are 2 slides that pull together all of that contact information with websites, email addresses, and telephone numbers for everything we talked about tonight.
And I just wanted to share, it looks like we've gotten through all of the questions during the presentation tonight. But again, if you have any questions at all, feel free to email any of the addresses that Jerry has put up, depending on what subject area. But in general, you can always ask your IEP team, as Jerry has mentioned, and they will be able to provide you with information and put you in the right direction. Thank you, everyone, for attending tonight, and thank you to Andre, Rachel, and Christine for your support.
No, thank you, Jerry, and thank you, Andrea. This has been a phenomenal presentation. As indicated, you will receive a survey automatically as soon as this webinar session wraps up. Everyone that has attended will automatically receive a thank you for attending email, as well as a recording of this webinar. On your dashboard is a handout section. Several of the items or the materials that were discussed throughout the presentation currently exist in the handout section of your dashboard on your screen. We will also provide these handouts in your thank you email that you will get subsequently at the conclusion of this webinar within the next 24 hours. So again, if you are registered and have attended, even if you have not attended, so attended or not attended, you will receive an email thanking you for registering. And in that email would include a link to a recording of this webinar session and handouts. But if you would like to use the handouts now or gather the handouts now, you should see a handout section. There are 5 documents living in that handout section of your dashboard. And you again will receive those handouts in your thank you for attending and thank you for registering email that will come 24 hours at the conclusion of this session. That recording will also allow you the option to use the translation options for any language that is your native language that you would like to listen to this recording post our session together. We do encourage you to provide us an integral feedback to help us grow at the conclusion of this survey. We hope that this content in this evening was helpful. Remember, we have our Beyond Access series every Tuesday. You can see past recordings on our YouTube channel, and you'll see a link to that in your thank you email. And you can also register for future and upcoming sessions on our schools.nyc.gov website. And you'll continue to look out for email communications from us, encourage you to attend future and upcoming Beyond Access series sessions. We hope that this was helpful, and we hope that you're leaving what we like to call warm and informed, that you gained a lot of valuable insight and information, and you know where you can direct your future questions or concerns. Again, thank you to Jerry and Andrea for answering and for providing some great content this evening. If there's any additional questions that just came up, I'll defer to Andrea, but if not, we'll close up our session this evening. Is there anything that we want to speak over the mic as a question that came in?
There was a question about District 75, and as Jerry had put in the presentation, there is a wealth of information on their website that you can get to, and I think I responded to one person individually, but we put that information in the deck, and we'll share that right after the presentation. And then there were a couple of questions about where the IEP meetings will take place, and I was just about to respond to another one that came up. The answer is that the IEP meetings will occur based on the location that you'll get in that PWN, the prior written notice, the letter, which is a notice of referral that you'll receive. As indicated by Jerry, it's a letter that will be sent out by your IEP team that will give the location of where the meeting will be held. It may or may not be your child's current school. So just wanted to share that in most cases, it will be in the same zone or in the same district that you live, but there will be cases where that is not possible, or there will be a different reason, and that change will be shared with you, usually within 5 days before that meeting. And so if there are any other questions about the IEP process, we do have a lot of information on our Moving to Kindergarten website. So please feel free to take a look at that. Otherwise, please feel free to reach out to us directly.
All right. Perfect. Well, we thank you for joining us this evening. Again, we'll send you out this recording and the content within the next 24 hours. But please feel free to take or download copies of the handouts in the handout section of the dashboard. And we'll be wrapping up in about 2 seconds. On your screen will pop up our post webinar survey. We do encourage you to provide us additional feedback so we can grow as a team and a division. And we thank you for joining us this evening. All right. Have a great night.